Hello, and welcome to Good News Rhode Island, the show about Rhode Island and the people and places and events that make Rhode Island a great place to live, that build Rhode Island communities. Most of the people we talk to work behind the scenes, and none more than poets. Today we're going to be doing a recap of a show that happened at the Wickford Art Association this last September, and it was run by Kim Baker, who is a poet and also an artist. That Wickford Art Association works very hard to work with written word as well as with sculpture, art, and music. So we appreciate their multi-arts programs. Today we have the Ocean State Poets who were part of that program in September. The program was called Vermeer in Word, or Vermeer in Poetry, and today we're calling our show Vermeer in Verse. We'd like to thank Kim Baker for the inspiration for it. Today we have poets Julia Simpson, William Carpenter, and Ira Schaefer. I'd like to welcome you all as Ocean State Poets here. We're going to talk for a moment about the process of writing. All of us received an email saying that this show was going to happen. Did we want to take part in it? And each one of us looked at different paintings, I assume, and chose one painting that was really important. Maybe one of you would be willing to talk about how you start writing a poem by looking at a painting, ekphrasis, as it's called.
Well, I can say that, I picked the astronomer. I didn't actually pick the astronomer. It was picked for me.
Okay, Kim gave it to you.
Kim gave it to me, which was really kind of a happy accident because I like astronomy and I really enjoy, a lot of the writing I do will have an astronomy focus, so I enjoyed getting that assignment. And when you look at the painting, I hadn't actually seen it. There's so much detail in the painting about astronomy and also astrology, because astronomy and astrology were very much part of the same thing back in Vermeer's time. Astronomy was just really emerging as a science. Galileo had just, for instance, discovered the moons of Jupiter, and unfortunately he had to recant that under great pressure. But so that was part of it for me, was once I got this subject, I knew that I was okay because it was something that I wanted to do.
Julie, how about you?
Yes, okay, so for me, my painting was the young woman with the water pitcher. And for me, I'm curious about the people in the painting. So I had to read about Vermeer, and then I wanted to know who that woman was. And so I took it upon myself to make it his wife, who had 15 children by Vermeer. 10 lived. And I just wondered what it was like to be the wife of a painter who spent most of his time upstairs painting while 10 children roamed around the house and she took care of the house. So that's where I started, and with the story. So that's what my painting.
Okay, so you've in some ways you've personalized it, which is
a lot
important
about her, though.
Yeah.
You know, I wanted to find out about her. There's not
understanding
a lot to
women
tell. Yes,
is very important.
I just love the idea of women, what they did in that time period. So that's where I started.
Yeah, and for me, I did a poem, A Lady Writing a Letter with Her Maid, and it was the only Vermeer picture where a subject wasn't in the light. The maid herself was in a corner, and she seemed sort of out of the center of it, yet all my attention, and I think the viewer's attention, went to this standing figure in the shadow. And I identified her as sort of like my way of voicing the poetry in the painting. She was the observer, the quiet one, sort of my artist type. So that's how I used her.
Let's talk for a minute about Vermeer, because he was born in Delft. He was baptized in 1632, which is quite a few years ago. But it was at a time when the world was opening in incredible degrees. I mean, there was exploration, for example. Spices were moved, all kinds of things were being traded. And art was about to change radically because it was being influenced by other countries. But he was basically influenced by the paintings that were in his mother's house and the paintings that were in his mother-in-law's house. And the first paintings he did were paintings of religious scenes, but there was also one in a brothel, and he was one of the procurers of a prostitute, and that is the only portrait we are sure is of him. So it's a very strange thing. He was living in a Catholic neighborhood after he was married, and in a very Protestant city, and so he had a lot of tensions, I assume, having to do with theological issues that he was painting out of his paintings. In other words, he did not put those all in his paintings. But there were conventions of paintings that he was using. What did you find out about Vermeer that really enticed you to keep writing? Any of you?
Well, to be honest, I love the idea that there wasn't a lot known about him, because then I could kind of go off on that, right? Because he is considered the Sphinx of Delft or something, because his story, there wasn't a lot to learn about him. There wasn't a lot of history about him. There's not a lot, because he was considered, he wasn't very famous in his time. He was mildly famous, but after that he kind of even fell off out of the picture. So I enjoyed the fact that I could create a world for him. There was information about how he loved to use color, and he used expensive pigments, which I thought was very interesting too. Ultramarine, which is in a lot of our paintings that we did, that bright blue, that was very expensive in that time frame to use that paint color. So I thought that was interesting. I'd love to know how he got his hands on that, because his mother-in-law was rich, but he wasn't that rich. So I'm just curious. I would love to know more. I'm sure there's much more to know about him.
Upon the death of his father, he had to pay his father's debts. And his mother-in-law did have money and did have a lovely house where he lived. But in the end, it turned out that he had all kinds of support from local people who were interested in art. His father had been an art dealer, so that was a natural thing. His father had also had an inn or some kind of a tavern, so he also inherited that business, and he kept working through all that with 10 babies or 15 babies. And
the number is right.
And he was also chair of a guild, a painters guild, St. Luke's Guild, in Delft. He never traveled, and he uses artifacts or things in his paintings to show his worldliness.
Right, the maps.
The maps, and there's always an Oriental rug, and those are signs of his travel. So our scheduler, wonderful Emily Westcott, has asked me if I would start, and because my name starts with A, not for any other reason. And so I did the poem about the kitchen maid. And she's also called the milkmaid, but she's pouring milk. She's not milking a cow. And I called my poem, The Unknown Kitchen Maid. He paints while she stands tableside pouring milk, absorbed in late afternoon sun. Observers think she smiles. He, 25-year-old master of the house of small rooms, limited belongings, watches every shadow, her motions, pouring, stirring by rote, what she has done, what she will do. A worn, starched bonnet frames her downturned eyes, hiding the sweep of hair. Soiled, rolled sleeves expose strong arms, hands tanned as her face. She has not been pampered. She blends milk, old bread, spice, milk sop pudding, what she knows by training and experience in 1658. Word of mouth reaches even her. Distant battle news, the plague, financial woes of the time, ships blown off course in winter bluster, bounty of trade not hers to cherish, tales of travel she will never take, told market day. Secluded, he is teaching himself color, direction of light, kitchen textures, eggshell wall, nail hole pocked, watermarked, plaster flaking, Delft tiles, the foot warmer. She knows little of his craft or skill, awkward under his stare, his physical presence. She sees folds of her dress, protective blue apron, light, soft on calfskin bodice. Convention would tell him pouring milk, a large-mouthed jug, is seductive. This moment, self-conscious, she allows herself a smile while preparing.
Nice job.
It's such an earthy painting. It's the woman is obviously seems to be a peasant woman, and it's just so unlike, I think, the other paintings of Vermeer. For me, anyway, most of them are more refined. Even the maids and the other people, but this woman reminds you almost of the potato eaters or something like that. By that kind of connection by who am I thinking of?
Van Gogh.
And much later.
Yeah,
Yes.
it is. But he influenced, of course,
Yes.
Definitely.
a lot of generations of painting.
I chose this painting because it was of a poor girl. I chose it because of her stature and the fact that people think she has a Mona Lisa smile, And I feel she's just plain embarrassed at having a man's gaze and her master's gaze. And her master isn't wealthy, and that's a small room, and it's not well kept. And she's not well dressed. But they're doing, he's learning and she's got a job, and that's their life. You don't imply anything else about their relationship, but there are a few words that I put in to imply something else could have been going on as well. But this is the only painting he did of poor women, because he wanted women to look, I believe, like they were part of the scene. And therefore they had to have these beautiful clothes on, and she did not. She just had a lot of color, and obviously she didn't have the tapestry on the floor or on the table either. Bill, you have been writing poems for a while, and you are well known in Ocean State Poets. You've worked in sociology and psychology with a minor in English. So you've got some literary background as well, but you seem to be delving into poetry more and more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really been fun. I mean, since retirement, I've certainly got more and more into it. And I usually kind of don't write from in an aphraxis or phraxis, however we say that word. I always have trouble with it kind of way. But we've done that. Ira and I have done quite a bit of that in the past with local galleries we've gone in. And it's a nice way to kind of jumpstart your poetry.
And you've written about the astronomer, which is another very wonderful poem. Do you know the date when it was?
The astronomer was, yeah, I do. I think it was 1668. I think it's actually referenced
10 years
in the poem.
after the one I painted.
Yeah, and I found it a very interesting poem. Some of the details in it, there's a celestial globe, which is very, very detailed, and that celestial globe is really like, you can see elements of the zodiac and some of the constellations in it. There's a book that's open in the painting, and it's a book on astronomy, a contemporary book on astronomy, and they know what page it's open to, and it's open to a chapter that is inviting the astronomer or the astrologer to seek his inspiration from God. There's a painting in the back of Moses, who is considered to be in the Old Testament, the certainly purveyor of wisdom and all of that, so including astronomy. So the poem is called The Astronomer, and I'm coming at it a little bit differently. Everybody talks about things opening up, and it was opening up, but it was also still emerging from a darkness that was very much still a part, I think, of that era. So The Astronomer. It was the dawn of empiricism, filtering its way through a dark forest of superstition. Galileo had recanted his heresy of heliocentrism to realign with church doctrine, restoring Earth to primacy. In the midst of these times, Vermeer invites you into an astronomer's study. You cross a threshold, a ghost from the future, into a scene paused in the year 1668. You notice his desk draped in a blue-green tapestry, the color of the subject's robe, the boyish face framed in auburn hair, spilling over his shoulder from a brocade skull cap. He wears an uncelebrated pearl earring. Sun falls softly, unannounced, through a stained glass window onto a celestial globe he reaches to turn. Buried in thought, he studies the orb. Its celestial carousel churns through his imagination. Medius's astronomy lies open, urging him to seek inspiration from God. He has no telescope, but knows a night unpolluted by light or industry, where stars dazzle and the Milky Way glows in a dense, luminous fog. Though his evenings are brilliant, authority supersedes observation. He still imagines a division of earth and firmament described in Genesis. For in truth he is an astrologer, knowledgeable in myth, believing the heavens control human destiny. He is right, of course, but cannot know that we are made of stardust. So we marvel instead at Vermeer's textures of paint, illustrating his dim but brightening light. Perhaps envying how right his cosmos must have felt, compared with our vast and unimaginable one, where motes of dust drift like other worlds, filling the innumerable rooms of space.
Mystery.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, it's...
Mythology. Everything all mixed together, isn't it? With the constellations and the searching out new ways, new science.
It is the dawn of a new era, but it's still very much, I think, tainted in a way by this medievalism that's still very much a part of Europe.
Ira, you have written a poem about the woman and the maid.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about this poem.
The poem.
Well, tell us about what impressed you.
Yes. Here again, Vermeer, you'll probably notice as you see the various paintings, they're always inside in a relatively small space, yet sometimes the subjects their minds are elsewhere. If there's any expansiveness, it's within the mind. And I think Vermeer, celebrating the surface and the glitter and the and the beauty of detail, but he also is, in a way, psychological, takes us inside. So that's where I went with the maid. And so the maid is the focal point, and the maid, as you'll see, is looking out the window while her mistress is busy at her desk writing. And it frees her to be thinking about maybe something else beside her, the drudgery of everyday task of attending to her mistress. And so my poem is called Lady. It's a lady writing a letter with her maid. And Vermeer painted this in 1671. Outside, the morning light stretches above the narrow walkways, brightening the tired trees and the two sluggish windmills exhausted in their turning. The red fishing boats have sailed, the gulls giddy with expectation, while I'm stuck here like a post, waiting. Look at my poor mistress, so earnest, so intent on staining her fancy paper with her purple, heart, love, fate, and the rest of that dribble. Sweet to think her notes cut to ribbons, woven with twigs and bits of string by noisy house sparrows. Tick-tock, a cuckoo's in her clock. I can hear her quill chirp with each scratch of its pointy beak. Let me out, it cries. Oh, what's the use? I'll write the damn letter myself, tuck it inside my blue headscarf, then pass it to her smitten cavalier, or is it the banker's son? But what's the worth of the pearls I write compared to those she wears? Fate has fixed our places. I can flirt my way to a fresher loaf, a better cut of beef, while my dull mistress is fed with a golden spoon. Never mind. Someday this maid will fly from this glittering box, a lady of boundless charm, a jewel in the bright world they call New Amsterdam.
She's moving to New York City, is what you're saying. That's pretty frightening.
Well, not for her. It's be better than standing like a post.
So you imagine the area outside, and it's true. Vermeer used his own rooms, or the rooms of his mother's house,
Right.
mother-in-law's
and her
house.
gaze
And
is outside. So
she is definitely looking out. And he is very, very impressed with light and the use of light to bring out color, which was in that painting as well. So you enjoyed writing it.
I really did. She allowed me to speak, and not that I need an excuse to do that, but it allowed me to get a different point of view on on her world, and that was important to me.
It does have a lot of interest for us, doesn't it? And Julie, you have written also about a maid and a woman, maid and her mistress, probably.
Well, mine is the woman. She's pouring water in the morning. But you pointed out about light. And for me, the light in Vermeer is really what captured me. I found this painting to be the lightest of all. And when I read about it, they even called it the most poetic of all of his paintings because of the light, because of what she's doing, a young woman just caught in her morning, getting ready for the day. And another artist for me in contemporary is Edward Hopper. That's who I connected with because that's who I love. I love Hopper's work, light, what he does with light in his paintings. So that's what connected me. So the title of mine is Pouring Light. And the painting was painted late, about the same time as his other portraits of young women. And again, this is about his wife, Katharina. That is her name. This morning, Jan asked me to pose for him again, to hold this, to touch that, as if I didn't have enough to do. First, he covered a table with red cloth and placed my jewelry case, just so, slipping a blue ribbon over the edge. Then he fidgeted with a map. On the wall behind me, he moved it and moved it again. Really, what need have we for maps? He turned the shallow silver basin and my mother's pitcher ever so slightly. And again, touch this, hold that. And to think where he left his muddy shoes last night. Then he told me to turn, like this, turn more. He asked me to look toward the window and said, hold still. It was early morning. A bird sang in the garden. Church bells chimed as Delft awoke. I heard the children stir downstairs and the baby cry. The air was cool, but the sun had warmed the room. Ah, the sun. We so seldom see it here. I must get the clothes outside in the line today. And then suddenly, oh, how do I put this into words? I felt the light pour over me. Like warm water, it splashed over my bare arm, soaking the fine hairs there, and then my breast, my neck, the curls under my hoofdeck. I don't know how else to say this. I finally understood why Jan loves the light more than me, more than his children, more than life. I watched dust motes swim up and down in the white light that saturated everything. Even my drab house dress was drenched in ultramarine. I glowed. Yes, I glowed. And just then, Jan gasped. Hold still, he said. Yes, like that. Hold still. Hold still.
That is just a marvelous poem. I just
Yeah,
love
it's
the
a
way
great
you
poem.
kind of got into Vermeer's head and into the head of his wife posing and all of that. Just a wonderful opening up of what Vermeer may have felt and the light. It's just beautiful, beautifully done.
He died so young, I think that captured my interest too. And when he died, as you were talking to Alana, they had no money. I mean, she sold his paintings to pay for her children's everything. So she was lost without him. So it was kind of interesting that he died so young and didn't leave that many paintings behind. He took so long to paint because he was so meticulous. Can't imagine how many hours she stood for him.
He only painted about 40 paintings, I
Yeah,
believe.
there isn't that many.
Or they only still exist. Yes.
Yeah, that we know exist. There could be
Yes.
others.
I assume somebody will find some somewhere.
I wouldn't doubt it either. But he took a long time to paint, they said. Yeah, so I thought that was interesting.
The astronomer ended up in Hitler's Lauder, and it wasn't returned until after the
That's
war.
right,
And
yeah.
now it's in the Louvre.
Wow.
But he was so unknown that he was not even sold for 200 years or something. His paintings weren't sold.
And again, the thing, I think this painting is very small. It's in the Met, in the Metropolitan, and I remember going by it, but it didn't impress me when I saw it. It's very small, and I'm sure the layers, the years, it wasn't as bright, but it was interesting to see it there, so kind of small. It feels so large for me.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming and for reading and for thinking through these paintings. It was a wonderful exercise. I want to thank Kim Baker, who's not here, who was the person who designed it all, and the Wickford Art Association, who invited us to come. So thank you for watching the show, Good News Rhode Island, show about Rhode Island and all the people and places and events that make Rhode Island a great place to live. Thank you to poets.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Juliana.